Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and this is the Piracy Show now. Right off the bat, we got a better build today. We got a much nicer build. Still some issues, still some problems, but it got a bit better. The performance was a little bit better. Over time, though, it did degrade. There was better responsiveness, especially early on. Now, that's, of course, something that has been throughout many of the builds. As the further you go in the game, the longer you play, the more you seem to suffer. But it seemed to take longer for that to build up before things finally got to a crippling point. But it has improved, and that was nice to see, and I enjoyed it. Some of the missions, unfortunately, still not working, but I did do some exploring. I got to Levski, and I messed around with some things. I hopped into an Ursa rover and took it out for an excursion. Not to the best of result, or rather, not with the best of results. But we did get to see some interesting quirks in the physics system, so it wasn't without its entertainment value. Not the entertainment value we expected, but still, I mean, it's kind of funny. Now, one thing that I wanted to talk about yesterday, I kind of touched on it a little bit when I made a little joke when I was making the video about this ship here, the Prospector, and kind of messing around with it a little bit. And I said, oh man, look at the amazing view. And I started to laugh, and those of you who've watched the channel quite a lot probably know why I find that funny. Because, you know, I've made a lot of videos over the years talking about, geez, hard to say years, but over the years, I've made a few videos talking about the views from cockpits, and I realize there's a lot of people on both sides of the fence. And I mean, within our own org, we actually had quite a heated debate on the subject matter. And, you know, I had made a video the week before talking about not being able to see to land your ship, and, you know, saying, you know, I think we need to take a second look at these cockpit views. And I realize that there's a lot of people who feel a certain way about their cockpit view. You know, there's one person who might be playing Star Citizen on a laptop, and to them, that's totally fine, and that's the way they want it, and that's cool. But then there's the other guy, of course, who has totally built out a virtual cockpit in his own house. And he's got everything lit up with mood lighting and all that stuff, and he's got all the switches and dials and everything all built in, and it looks amazing. And that's the way he wants to play Star Citizen. It's entirely subjective how you want to play the game and how you feel you're going to get the best level of immersion and enjoyment. And I realize that, you know, certainly if you take the Gladius, for example. Oh yes, that was looking down into the old Gladius cockpit back in the day. Things have changed quite a bit, especially if you get in 3.0, and I'll let you do that on your own. You'll see what I'm talking about. But, you know, even though the game is iterated and changed, and they've changed the layout of all the cockpits and all this stuff, at this point, to come around and say, oh, well, you got to change it all again because, you know, pilots need a better view and all that, it doesn't quite work. Because are we really going to go back and take a second look at every starfighter in the game? I think there's enough problems right now in the game that is kind of insisting on that, even if they said, oh, yep, you're right, let's do it. How much longer would it take, and how much would that set other things back? Probably quite a bit to go back and physically change the cockpits of so many ships to allow for a better combat view, or at least, in my opinion, a decent one, is probably not that much of an efficient use of time. So what do? Now, there's certain people who like the cockpits the way they are right now. There are certain people who don't. Now, we can argue about this back and forth, and we can do it for days and weeks on end and realistically get nowhere. But how do we bridge that gap? How do we bring things to an acceptable level for everyone. Keep the things the way they are for the people who like them the way they are, but improve things for people who think, I need to be able to see more. I need to be able to do more with my interface than just kind of be stuck to all these static little monitors, which may or may not work for you. Well, in fact, in Star Citizen, there's a way. Now, here's the old cockpit of the Hornet from way back in the olden days of Star Citizen. But how is that relevant to today's discussion? Well, stay a while and listen. Sorry, couldn't resist. Back in the old days, we had this overlay presented up to us in our helmet. I've said this, countless times before. I've talked about this. And all that information was, boom, projected up into your helmet. You could navigate through this through keyboard shortcuts, but because it was keyboard shortcuts as well, you could use voice command software to navigate all these menus. Fire flares, change energy levels. All of that you could do simply by talking into your mic and saying, lock my target, fire missiles, fire chaff. All those things could be done, and so much more. And it didn't matter so much about your cockpit view. Of course, we were sitting a little bit higher up and we had a slightly better view back then. How things have changed. Now, simply having these menus is kind of a proof of concept that you can do possibly some much more amazing things with these types of overlays. Something that has functioned in the game since the very beginning. Now, it's one thing to kind of sit there and look at a movie and say, oh yeah, but that's just a movie, that's just special effects. They just say, oh, we wanted to do this, we wanted to do that. The artist just goes out, makes it happen. It's not a real interface. It's not something that really works. It's not something that you would have in the real world. These are just things from silly science fiction movies. Well, not exactly. You see, these systems, to a certain extent, I guess you could say at a very primitive level, exist in the here and now. So it's conceivable that 1,000 years from now in the future that Star Citizen is supposed to be, that these types of systems would continue to exist. And I think the benefits of them are pretty obvious. Not only does it give you an alternative to the MFD system that we have now, but these things can also do other things in the game. Not only can these systems give you information on your ship systems, but if you were to alter them, augment them, possibly they could give you information on the terrain regardless of the obstructions in your view, giving you some very critical information, especially when you're trying to pilot or land in adverse conditions. Now, there's two good things that come with this. One, it kind of circumvents the debate altogether. Now, we can sit here and argue about it for years, and it's never going to go anywhere. Because in the end, there's, the cockpit views the way they are, which are more subjective. Or there are people who say, no, I don't need any of this. I just need the information. I need to know what's going on around me. Having a system like this implemented in the game kind of negates that debate, because now, depending on whatever sensor package or whatever you have in terms of software loaded onto your ship, you could be able to see these things. You could see a ship's orientation and direction even when it passes behind some kind of obstruction in your cockpit. All of that would be there. You can now see terrain detail enough to land even when the conditions are less than optimal. And for the people who want things the old way, who like the cockpit, who want that, that hand held up unusually high on the joystick so that they can see it moving around for them, if that's their immersion, then fine. Boom, it's still there and you can use it. But for the people who want it the other way, make a software upgrade to your ship and now you can see things and see information that's not there. All that information, remember, like in the Star Citizen universe, all that information is already there. It's simply hidden by that kind of overlay of your cockpit. Well, not an overlay, because it is a real, quote-unquote real 3D object in space, but that information is just beyond that object. It's there, and by maybe creating some type of simple overlay. You can relay that information to the pilot, and you can take away those MFDs for them and put that information up in their view if they want it that way. And there's a lot you can do with that type of system. You can change, depending on what components or what software you have loaded on your ship, you can change the resolution, you can change the range, you can do a lot of interesting things with a system like that, and only adds more depth to the fighters. And it doesn't require you to go back and say, okay, well, let's redesign all the fighter cockpits. You can create a system like this that works in any ship. Now, is it something that can just be developed quickly? Something that, you know, it's not a light switch that they can flip. This isn't something that they can go, oh, hey, Zane, while you're working on the Moby Glass, can you just flip that switch so we can get all these combat overlays into the game? Probably not. It's probably going to take a little while to develop something like this, but I think it's an idea worth exploring, and I think it's something to have a back and forth conversation with CIG about. You know, not so much of a confrontational conversation, but maybe something to present an idea and say, hey, look, we know that there is a disagreement over this. Have you considered this? Would this be something you guys would be willing to explore as a way to kind of bridge the gap? It'll take time, but I kind of feel that time is something that we have. Anyways, that's the show for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.